Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm going to do a counter argument to Michelle Malkin's book, In Defense of Internment. Basically, she justifies the internment of Japanese-Americans during World War II, whereas I don't, or the internment of Japanese-Americans along the West Coast. Okay, and I'm going to produce counter argument. Now, after her book was written, Senator Daniel Akaka allowed pushed to allow the achievements of Japanese Americans that fought in the Pacific theater of World War II through military intelligence service. Daniel Akaka allowed the information to be published in a book, and the book Nisei Linguist was written by Dr. James McNaughton. Because Michelle Malkin notes in the book that Japanese Americans by and large were prohibited to serve in the Pacific theater in World War II. But by and large, that's what a lot of the American public thought, because that's what was the general opinion, because people didn't know about military intelligence service and what all they did. And the book Nisei Linguist goes on to show that that Caucasian linguists broke the code as to where Admiral Yamamoto would be and where the P-38 Lightnings could shoot him down, but the Nisei linguists were the ones who double-checked the work and made sure the translations were okay, and basically told the commanders that the operation could be a go. And that's noted in the book Nisei Linguist. Also, the book notes that Thomas Sakamoto graduated from a military high school in Japan in 1938, and he was offered a commission in the Imperial Japanese Army, but he declined it because he was a U.S. citizen. His loyalty was the USA. And the Japanese major waved a samurai sword in his face. And now Michelle Malkin did note that J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI at the time, opposed the evacuation of all Japanese Americans along the West Coast to be interned. But she didn't note that he opposed it. But J. Edgar Hoover was an expert in World War II with him and the FBI weeding out Nazi spies. So if J. Edgar Hoover declared the evacuation of Japanese Americans along the West Coast unnecessary, the U.S. government should have taken that into account, which by and large they did not. Now, she did know that J. Edgar Hoover opposed it, but she just noted that he didn't have access to all intelligence that the Roosevelt administration did, which is true. However, Hoover was an expert in capturing Nazi spies. So, if he thought the evacuation of Japanese Americans along the West Coast was unnecessary, then I believe his opinion, it should be noted in that. Should have been noted, I should say. Also, she did note that, yes, there were barbershops in the camp. There were newspapers that were allowed to be published. All that happened. But she also noted in the book that diarrhea outbreaks were common. I mean, a lot of times they were housed in horse stables and they had to clean themselves the horse feces and the hay that was in the stable just to make the living conditions halfway necessary. She didn't note that in the book. She also didn't note that Lieutenant General John DeWitt, who was, he didn't order the evacuation, but he was one of the main leaders when after it took place. He said, but this is his words, not mine, a Jap's a Jap, plain and simple. And 75% of the people that were interned were Nisei, were people who had been born in the United States. And yes, Michelle Malkin did note the Niihau incident on the island of Niihau. There were like 3 or 4 Japanese people that lived there, and 2 of them were Nisei, Yoshio and Irene Harada, and they aided a Japanese pilot, Nishikachi, whose plane was damaged and he had to crash his plane in Niihau. And that did go on. However, that was the exception, not the rule, because when Nisei from the Hawaii Territorial Guard got discharged shortly after Pearl Harbor, they volunteered to help do work on the bases and do construction work on the bases. They were called the Varsity Victory Volunteers. They wanted to prove their loyalty that much to the United States. And Michelle Malkin did not mention the Varsity Victory Volunteers in her book. And also, like a few weeks after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Americans were discharged, but not right away. A few days after Pearl Harbor, a lot of them were called to defend the machine guns in Hawaii against a possible Japanese invasion. And one Nisei soldier was next to a Japanese, or to a native Hawaiian soldier. And the native Hawaiian soldier said, if the Japanese come, are you going to shoot at them or shoot at me? And the Japanese-American soldier said, what do you think, stupid? I'm just as loyal of an American as you are. And yes, at Tully Lake internment camp, there was a lot of pro-Japanese sentiment, but that was one camp out of like 7 or 8 that were total. Okay, that was a rarity. And also, yes, 5,600, I believe it's 5,650 Nisei renounced their U.S. citizenship when they were in the camps and voluntarily became enemy aliens, but there were 120,000 Japanese that were interned. Okay, 75% of them were Nisei. I did the math. That's 0.625% that renounced their U.S. citizenship. That was a very, very, very small percentage that did that. An extremely small percentage. You had Harry Fukuhara, who fought for the United States through military intelligence service, and his brothers were living in Japan, and they had been conscripted into the Japanese army, but Harry Fukuhara fought honorably for the United States and won several commendations for his service in the Pacific. Also, Ben Kuroki was allowed to go into the Army Air Forces in World War II, and he served as a gunner on a B-29 that flew over Japan. And he had a lot of aunts and uncles at the time that were living in Japan. But Ben's Issei father said, the United States is your country, you were born here, so you guys should volunteer to prove your loyalty. And Michelle Malkin made no mention of Ben Kuroki in her book. And yes, there were areas in the West Coast that were vital for military strategic perspectives that could have been prone to sabotage. But one, civil liberties is the foundation of American life and American society. And there was, on the West Coast, there was no distinction between Japanese people who were here short-term and Japanese people that were here long-term. And there was no distinction between Issei, who were born in Japan, and then the Nisei, who were born in the United States. So, I highly encourage you guys to read the book and think for yourself and decide which way you go. I don't think Michelle Malkin's a racist. I think she honestly did that just because she thought that was the best way that America could have been safe at the time. And I personally don't think she's a racist. I personally didn't think the book was racist, but I think she was wrong in this. And I normally like her books, but this book, well, she made a valid argument for it. I still think she was wrong, and this is a reason that I say she was wrong. Anyways, hope everyone's doing well. Take care. God bless everybody. Bye-bye.